The computer lab fell silent except for the hum of ancient desktop towers and the sound of Jake Mitchell's fingers freezing above the keyboard. Behind him, footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, each step deliberate and predatory. The East Wing was supposed to be empty this late after school, but Jake should have known better. Tyler Richardson had been planning something for weeks, and the cruel smile that had been spreading across his face in the hallways told Jake that today was the day it would happen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows of Riverside High's oldest wing, where outdated computers hummed like dying insects and the security cameras had been broken for months. Jake had chosen this spot specifically because it was quiet, isolated, the perfect place to work on the programming project that would determine his final grade in a P computer science. What he hadn't counted on was Tyler Richardson's patience. The way the quarterback had been watching his patterns, learning his routines, waiting for exactly this moment when Jake would be completely alone and vulnerable. Tyler's shadow fell across Jake's monitor, blocking out the lines of code that had been flowing perfectly just moments before. The familiar scent of expensive cologne, mixed with the metallic smell of old computers, created an atmosphere thick with impending violence. Jake's hands remained steady on the keyboard, though every instinct screamed at him to run. Running would only make it worse. Running would give Tyler exactly what he wanted: the chase, the power, the satisfaction of watching someone smaller break under pressure. "You've been hiding in here for weeks," Richardson's voice carried the lazy confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. His father owned Richardson Construction, the company that employed nearly a third of Riverside's working population, including Jake's mother until her mysterious firing 6 months ago. That economic stranglehold translated into social power. At school, where teachers looked the other way and administrators made excuses, where Tyler Richardson could do whatever he wanted to whoever he wanted without fear. Jake finally turned in his chair, his dark eyes meeting Tyler's pale blue ones without flinching. The quarterback was flanked by Marcus Thompson and 2 other football players, their letterman jackets creating a wall of red and gold that blocked the only exit from the computer lab. In Marcus's hand, something gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a small tube that made Jake's stomach clench with understanding. Crazy glue, industrial strength. The kind that bonded instantly and permanently. The kind that could blind someone if it got in their eyes. "We've been thinking about you, Mitchell." Tyler's voice was conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "Thinking about how you walk around here like you're better than everyone else with your little computer projects and your perfect grades. Acting like you don't know your place in this town, in this school, in this world." Tyler gestured around the computer lab with mock grandeur. "This is where rats belong. In dark corners, forgotten and alone." Jake's fingers found the edge of his laptop, a refurbished machine he had built himself from discarded parts. Inside its hard drive were months of work, code that could revolutionize how small businesses manage their security systems. More importantly, hidden deep in encrypted folders were files that Tyler Richardson would kill to keep secret. Video, footage, financial records, evidence of the construction accident that had killed Jake's father 3 years ago. The same accident that Richardson Construction had covered up with bribes and threats. But Tyler didn't know about any of that. All he saw was a quiet kid who didn't fight back, who absorbed punishment without retaliation, who seemed like the perfect victim for whatever sick game was playing out in his entitled mind. What Tyler couldn't see was the way Jake's breathing had shifted into the controlled pattern he used when debugging complex code, the way his posture had subtly changed to protect his laptop and keyboard, the way his eyes were already calculating distances. And angles and possibilities. Your mother used to work for my dad, Tyler continued, stepping closer until Jake could see the tiny gold flecks in his irises. Before she got fired for being a thief. Guess criminal behavior runs in the family. The lie rolled off Tyler's tongue. Easily, practiced. Jake's mother had been the most honest bookkeeper Richardson Construction had ever employed, which was exactly why she had to be eliminated when she started asking questions about discrepancies in the safety equipment budget. Behind Tyler, Marcus was unscrewing the cap from the crazy glue tube, the chemical smell beginning to permeate the air. The other two players had moved to flank Jake's chair, cutting off any possibility of escape. This wasn't random bullying or teenage cruelty. This was calculated intimidation designed to send a message not just to Jake, but to anyone else in Riverside who might be thinking about challenging the Richardson family's authority. Jake's laptop screen flickered as a new message appeared. In his encrypted chat window, Emma Chun, 2 years younger but infinitely braver than most of the adults in their town, had been monitoring the school's security system from her own computer. No cameras in East Wing, but I'm recording audio through your laptop mic, already backed up to 3 different servers. Her fingers were faster than most people could read, her computer skills almost matching Jake's own. Hold position for 2 more minutes, help is coming. Tyler noticed Jake's eyes flick to the screen and lunged forward, grabbing for the laptop. That's when Jake moved, not like a victim or a quiet kid or someone who could be intimidated into silence, but like someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His hand slammed the laptop shut while his foot kicked out, connecting with Tyler's knee and sending the quarterback stumbling backward into Marcus. The crazy glue tube went flying, spinning through the air to crash against the whiteboard where it exploded in a sticky mess that would take hours to clean. For a moment, the entire room froze. Tyler Richardson, golden boy quarterback and untouchable prince of Riverside, was on the floor holding his knee and looking up at Jake Mitchell with something that might have been genuine surprise. No one had ever fought back before. No one had ever dared to touch the king of their small kingdom. But Jake was no longer the scared kid whose father had died in a suspicious accident, whose mother had been fired for asking inconvenient questions. He was someone else entirely, and Tyler Richardson was about to learn exactly who that was. The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds before Tyler's expression shifted from surprise to pure rage. His face flushed red as he scrambled to his feet, favoring the knee Jake had kicked. Around him, Marcus and the other players looked uncertain, their carefully rehearsed intimidation routine shattered by something none of them had experienced before: resistance. You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life, Mitchell. Tyler's voice cracked slightly, betraying the shock beneath his fury. His hands clenched into fists as he took a step forward, then stopped. Something in Jake's posture had changed. The quiet kid was still there, but underneath was something else. Something that made Tyler's predatory instincts hesitate. Jake stood. Slowly, his laptop clutched protectively against his chest. His dark hair fell across his eyes, but his gaze never wavered from Tyler's face. 3 years of careful observation had taught him to read the micro-expressions that crossed the quarterback's features, the tells that revealed when Tyler was truly confident versus when he was compensating for uncertainty. Right now, uncertainty was winning. The computer lab door burst open with a bang that echoed through the dusty room. Mr. Park strode in, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the spilled crazy glue on the whiteboard, Tyler's defensive stance, and Jake's protective grip on his laptop. Behind him, Principal Morrison appeared, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum as she surveyed the chaos. What exactly is happening here? Mr. Park's voice carried the authority of someone who had dealt with Tyler Richardson's games before. His Korean accent became more pronounced when he was angry, each word carefully enunciated. I received reports. of students gathering in an unauthorized area after school hours. Tyler's transformation was immediate and practiced. The rage melted from his features, replaced by the charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since elementary school. His posture relaxed, shoulders dropping as he spread his hands in a gesture of innocent confusion. "We were just working on a group project, Mr. Park. Jake was helping us with some computer stuff for our presentation." The lie rolled off his tongue with the ease of years of practice. Tyler Richardson had been perfecting the art of deception. Since he was old enough to understand that his father's money and influence could make problems disappear. Teachers wanted to believe him because questioning the mayor's nephew and the star quarterback's integrity meant questioning the foundations of Riverside itself. Principal Morrison stepped forward, her gray hair pulled back in its characteristic severe bun. Her eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, focused on the mess of crazy glue dripping down the whiteboard. She had been principal of Riverside High for 15 years, long enough to recognize the aftermath of bullying when she saw it, but also long enough to understand the political realities of dealing with the Richardson family. "Mr. Richardson," she began carefully, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had fought this battle too many times. "Perhaps you could explain why there appears to be industrial adhesive on my whiteboard, and why your group project required you to corner Mr. Mitchell in an isolated classroom." Tyler's smile never wavered. "Accident, Principal Morrison. Marcus was showing us something, and the tube slipped. You know how clumsy athletes can be with small objects." He gestured toward Marcus, who nodded eagerly, relief evident on his face at being given a script to follow. Jake watched the performance with fascination. This was Tyler's true talent, not throwing footballs or intimidating smaller students, but this seamless ability to reshape reality through sheer confidence and social positioning. Every adult in the room knew what had really happened, but Tyler was banking on their unwillingness to challenge him directly. Mr. Park moved closer. To Jake, his expression concerned. "Are you injured, Jake? Do you need medical attention?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His questions were gentle but pointed, giving Jake an opening to tell the truth if he chose to take it. Jake met his teacher's eyes, recognizing the genuine care there. Mr. Park had been his mentor for 2 years, guiding him through advanced programming concepts and encouraging his natural talent for cybersecurity. He was one of the few adults at Riverside High who seemed immune to the Richardson family's influence, possibly because his background in Silicon Valley had given him perspective on real power versus small-town politics. "I'm fine, Mr. Park." Jake's voice was steady, controlled. "Just a misunderstanding." He felt Emma Chun's earlier message burning in his laptop, the recorded audio that could expose Tyler's real intentions. But releasing it now would only escalate the situation without achieving anything meaningful. Tyler would deny everything. His friends would back him up, and Jake would be labeled a troublemaker for recording without permission. Principal Morrison's shoulders sagged slightly. She had been hoping Jake would give her something concrete to work with, evidence that would justify taking action against Tyler despite the inevitable backlash from his family. Without it, her hands were tied by the same political realities that had protected Tyler throughout his academic career. "Very well." She straightened her jacket with sharp, precise movements. "Mr. Richardson, I expect you and your friends to clean up this mess before you leave. And in the future, perhaps your group projects would be better conducted in the library during regular hours." Her tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. Tyler nodded, his expression appropriately chastened. "Of course, Principal Morrison. We apologize for any inconvenience." Behind his contrite facade, Jake could see the calculation happening. Tyler, already planning his next move, his next opportunity to reassert dominance. Mr. Park lingered as the others began to file out. "Jake, why don't you pack up your work? I'll walk you to the parking lot. It wasn't really a request. The computer science teacher had recognized something in the interaction that concerned him, some undercurrent of tension that suggested this was far from over. Jake nodded, carefully shutting down his laptop and gathering his cables. His movements were methodical, practiced, the routine of someone who had learned to protect his most valuable possessions. The laptop contained 3 years of work, not just school projects, but personal ventures that had already earned him a small income fixing computers for local businesses. As they walked through the empty hallways, Mr. Park spoke quietly. "You know, Jake, there are resources available if students feel unsafe at school. Counselors, support groups, even anonymous reporting systems." His words were carefully chosen, offering help without directly acknowledging what had just occurred. Jake appreciated the offer, but he also understood its limitations. Riverside High's counselors were well-meaning but overwhelmed and anonymous. Reports about Tyler Richardson had a way of disappearing into administrative black holes. The support systems Mr. Park mentioned were designed for ordinary bullying situations, not for conflicts that intersected with the town's economic and political power structures. "Thank you, Mr. Park. I'll keep that in mind." Jake's response was polite but non-committal. He had learned years ago that adults, even the well-intentioned ones, operated within systems that prioritized stability over justice. They wanted to help, but they also wanted to avoid the messy complications that came with challenging established hierarchies. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to teachers and students involved in after-school activities. Jake's transportation was a 10-speed bicycle, ancient but well-maintained, that he had inherited from his father. It wasn't much, but it represented independence, the ability to move through Riverside on his own terms without depending on anyone else. Mr. Park waited until Jake had secured his laptop in his backpack and mounted his bike. "Be careful riding home, Jake, and remember, my door is always open if you need to talk." The teacher's concern was genuine, but there was also something else in his expression, a recognition that Jake was facing challenges beyond what any 17-year-old should have to handle alone. Jake pedaled through the streets of Riverside as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the houses. The town looked peaceful from a distance, a postcard-perfect example of small-town America with its tree-lined streets and well-maintained facades. But Jake knew the reality beneath the surface, the way economic dependency created webs of obligation and silence that protected people, like Tyler Richardson, from meaningful consequences. He passed Richardson Construction's main office, a modern building that dominated the town's modest business district. Through the large windows, he could see people in hard hats and business suits moving between conference rooms, making decisions that affected every family in Riverside. Somewhere in those offices, Tyler's father was probably planning another development project that would line his pockets while cutting corners on worker safety. Jake's mother would be starting her evening shift at Riverside General Hospital about now, beginning another 12-hour marathon of caring for sick and injured patients. She had taken the job after Richardson Construction fired her, accepting a significant pay cut because it was the only position available that didn't require moving to a larger city. The work was exhausting, but it was honest, and it allowed her to use her skills while keeping Jake in the same school district. The apartment complex where they lived sat on the edge of town, a collection of low-income units that housed most of Riverside's service workers. It wasn't much to look at, but Jake had learned to appreciate what they had rather than dwelling on what they had lost. His father's death had changed everything, not just emotionally but financially, forcing them to rebuild their entire lives around a much smaller income. Jake locked his bike to the railing outside their second-floor apartment and climbed the external stairs. The unit was quiet and empty, as it had been most afternoons since his mother started working double shifts. He had grown accustomed to the solitude, using the time to work on personal projects and explore programming concepts that went far beyond what Riverside High's limited curriculum could offer. His laptop powered up with a soft hum, the screen displaying the desktop he had customized with shortcuts to dozens of specialized programs. Most of his classmates use computers for social media and gaming, but Jake had discovered their true potential as tools for understanding and manipulating information systems. What had started as curiosity about how things worked had evolved into genuine expertise in cybersecurity and digital forensics. The encrypted folder containing his father's accident investigation opened with a complex password that combined elements meaningful only to Jake, inside police reports, safety inspection records, witness statements, and financial documents that painted a disturbing picture of corporate negligence and cover-up. His father had died because Richardson Construction had used substandard materials to increase profit margins, then bribed inspectors to overlook safety violations. Jake had been gathering this evidence for 3 years, slowly and carefully building a case that could expose the truth about his father's death. But he had also learned that evidence without power was just data, and in Riverside, real power belonged to people like Tyler's father. The Richardson family had survived previous scandals through a combination of legal maneuvering, financial pressure, and strategic character assassination of anyone who challenged them. Today's incident in the computer lab had been more than teenage bullying. Tyler had been sending a message reminding Jake of his place in the town's hierarchy and warning him against any thoughts of challenging the established order. The crazy glue had been meant to humiliate and intimidate, to demonstrate that even in the supposed safety of the school, Jake was vulnerable to Richardson revenge. But Tyler had made a mistake. In his arrogance, he had revealed his intentions in front of witnesses and recording devices. Emma Chen's audio file was already safely stored on multiple servers, beyond the reach of Richardson money and influence. More importantly, Tyler had shown fear, a crack in the facade of invincibility that had protected him throughout his privileged life. Jake opened a new programming window and began typing, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. Lines of code appeared on the screen, elegant and purposeful, building toward something that would change the balance of power in Riverside forever. Tyler Richardson thought he understood strength and weakness, dominance and submission. He was about to learn how wrong he had been. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon had filled the Mitchell household that morning 3 years ago, the last normal morning Jake would ever experience. His father, David Mitchell, had been humming some old rock song while packing his lunch for another day at the Richardson construction site downtown. The Riverside Community Center renovation project was supposed to be straightforward, replacing old electrical systems and reinforcing the building's foundation so it could continue serving the town's children for another generation. Jake had been 14 then, still young enough to believe that hard work guaranteed fair outcomes and that adults in positions of authority could be trusted to do the right thing. He had been proud of his father's job, the way David Mitchell commanded respect from other construction workers, despite being one of the newer hires. His dad had a background in electrical engineering from his military service, skills that made him valuable even in a small town like Riverside, where advanced technical knowledge was rare. David Mitchell had noticed the problems almost immediately. Substandard wiring that wouldn't meet code requirements, foundation materials that looked suspiciously different from what the specifications called for, safety equipment that bore counterfeit certification stamps. Being a conscientious man who understood that cutting corners in construction could cost lives, he had started documenting everything with the same methodical precision he had learned in the Army, the laptop that would eventually become Jake's most prized possession had originally belonged to his father. David Mitchell used it to photograph safety violations, record conversations with supervisors, and maintain detailed logs of every corner that Richardson Construction cut in pursuit of higher profit margins. He had planned to present his findings to the appropriate authorities once he had gathered enough evidence to make his case irrefutable. Jake discovered his father's digital investigation 3 months after the funeral, when his mother finally felt strong enough to go through David's personal belongings. The laptop had been password protected, but Jake's natural curiosity about technology had led him to experiment with different combinations, until he stumbled across his father's military service number combined with Jake's birth date. What he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about his father's death. The official story had been simple and tragic. Experienced worker suffers fatal fall due to personal carelessness. Safety protocols were followed, no negligence on the part of Richardson Construction. The local newspaper had run a brief obituary emphasizing David's military service and describing the accident as a reminder that construction work carried inherent risks despite modern safety measures. Case closed, family compensated with a modest settlement. Everyone moved on with their lives. Jake's father's files told a different story entirely. David Mitchell had died because Richardson Construction had installed defective safety rails that couldn't support a worker's weight, using materials that cost 30% less than the approved specifications required. The fall that killed him had been entirely preventable, the result of systematic cost-cutting that prioritized profit margins over human lives. Worse, the company had known about the defective materials for weeks before the accident occurred. Learning the truth about his father's death had transformed Jake's relationship with computers from casual interest to obsessive dedication. He taught himself programming languages through online tutorials, spending hours each day after school, absorbing everything he could about cybersecurity, digital forensics, and information systems. His natural aptitude for logical thinking made the transition from curious teenager to skilled hacker surprisingly rapid. His mother, Lisa Mitchell, had been too consumed by grief and financial pressure to notice her son's newfound obsession with technology. David's death had eliminated the family's primary income source, forcing her to take whatever work she could find while dealing with medical bills, funeral expenses, and the reality of raising a teenager alone. The nursing position at Riverside General Hospital paid less than her previous job at the bank, but it was steady work that came with health insurance and the possibility of overtime shifts. Jake learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity, rather than choice. He prepared his own meals, managed his own schedule, and handled household responsibilities that should have been shared with adults. The independence was sometimes lonely, but it also gave him freedom to pursue his investigation without having to explain his activities to anyone. His mother trusted him to be responsible, and Jake had never given her reason to doubt that trust. The first time Jake successfully hacked into a secure system, he was 15 years old and trying to access Richardson Construction's internal communications. He had spent months learning about network vulnerabilities and social engineering techniques, practicing on less sensitive targets until he felt confident enough to attempt something that could have serious legal consequences if he got caught. The thrill of breaking through their digital defenses was intoxicating, but the information he discovered was devastating. Richardson Construction's executives had known about the defective safety equipment for 6 weeks before David Mitchell's accident. Internal emails showed discussions about whether to replace the materials or risk continued use, with cost considerations ultimately winning out over worker safety. The decision had been made at the highest levels of the company, signed off on by Tyler's father personally, with full knowledge that someone could be seriously injured or killed. Even more damning were the communications that followed David's death. Richardson executives had immediately begun coordinating their legal response, hiring expensive attorneys to minimize liability and private investigators to dig up any personal information that could be used to discredit David's character. They had prepared to argue that his military background indicated PTSD or other mental health issues that might have contributed to carelessness. despite having no evidence to support such claims. The cover-up had been methodical and thorough. Safety inspectors were bribed to alter their reports. Witnesses were pressured to change their statements, and David's personnel file was sanitized to remove any record of his safety concerns. The modest settlement offered to Lisa Mitchell had included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented her from discussing the circumstances of her husband's death, though she had been too devastated at the time to understand the implications of what she was signing. Jake's investigation revealed a pattern of similar incidents stretching back years. Richardson Construction had been cutting corners and covering up accidents since Tyler's father took control of the company, building their success on a foundation of worker exploitation and regulatory capture. The town's economic dependence on Richardson jobs had created a conspiracy of silence that protected the company from meaningful oversight or accountability. Understanding the full scope of his father's murder, because that was how Jake had come to think of it, required him to develop increasingly sophisticated technical skills. He learned to navigate the dark web, where security vulnerabilities and hacking tools were traded like commodities. He studied social engineering techniques that could trick employees into revealing sensitive information. He mastered the art of covering his digital tracks, ensuring that his intrusions into Richardson systems would never be traced back to him. The irony was that Richardson Construction's digital security was surprisingly weak for a company with so much to hide. They relied on outdated systems and poorly trained employees, making them vulnerable to anyone with sufficient motivation and technical knowledge. Jake suspected that their arrogance made them sloppy, confident that a small-town teenager could never pose a serious threat to their carefully constructed empire of corruption. His first real confrontation with Tyler Richardson had occurred during his sophomore year, 6 months after he began his digital investigation. Tyler had been a junior then, already displaying the entitled cruelty that would define his high school career. The interaction had been brief but revealing, Tyler shoving Jake in the hallway while making comments about his father's stupidity and getting himself killed on the job. At the time, Jake had absorbed the humiliation in silence, too focused on his investigation to risk drawing attention to himself through retaliation. But he had filed the incident away in his memory, adding it to his growing understanding of how the Richardson family operated. They attacked anyone who posed even a theoretical threat to their position, using intimidation and social pressure to maintain control over potential challengers. The technical skills Jake developed during his investigation had practical applications. Beyond exposing Richardson Construction's crimes, he began offering computer repair services to local businesses, using his expertise to solve problems that would have cost them hundreds of dollars if handled by professionals from larger cities. Word spread quickly in a town the size of Riverside, and soon Jake had a steady stream of clients who appreciated his combination of technical competence and reasonable prices. The income from his repair work helped ease some of the financial pressure on his mother, though he was careful not to reveal how much money he was actually earning. Lisa Mitchell was proud of her son's entrepreneurial spirit, but she would have been concerned if she knew that a significant portion of his income came from cybersecurity consulting for businesses that needed protection from increasingly sophisticated digital threats. Mr. Park had been the first adult to recognize the full extent of Jake's abilities. The computer science teacher had initially been impressed by Jake's programming assignments, which consistently went far beyond what the curriculum required. But during a conversation about career possibilities, Jake had casually mentioned solving a network security problem that should have been beyond the capabilities of any high school student. Rather than being suspicious or concerned, Mr. Park had been genuinely excited to discover a student with such exceptional potential. He began providing Jake with additional resources and challenges, treating him more like a colleague than a student. Their relationship had evolved into something approaching mentorship, though Jake was careful to keep his most sensitive activities hidden even from someone he trusted. The computer lab had become Jake's sanctuary during the school day, the one place where he could work on projects that truly interested him without having to pretend to be just another average student. Mr. Park's protection had been crucial in maintaining that space, ensuring that Jake had access to equipment and resources that he couldn't afford at home. The lab also provided a legitimate explanation for why Jake spent so much time working with computers, deflecting curiosity about his real activities. Jake's relationship with his mother had grown more complex as he matured and learned to keep secrets. He loved her deeply and wanted to protect her from additional pain, but he also knew that she deserved to understand the truth about her husband's death. The non-disclosure agreement she had signed made open discussion impossible, but Jake had been gradually introducing information that might help her reach her own conclusions about what had really happened. The apartment they shared had become a workspace as much as a home, filled with computer equipment that Jake had assembled from discarded components and refurbished machines. His mother assumed it was all related to his repair business and school projects, never suspecting that her son was using their living room to conduct industrial espionage against one of Oregon's most powerful construction companies. Late at night, when his mother was working her hospital shifts, Jake would continue his investigation into Richardson Construction's operations. He had developed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of their business practices, their political connections, and their methods for avoiding accountability. The information he had gathered could destroy the company and send multiple executives to prison, but he also understood that releasing it prematurely could result in his own destruction. The Richardson family's power in Riverside was built on more than just economic influence. They had cultivated relationships with law enforcement, local media, and political leaders that would allow them to weather almost any scandal if they had time to prepare their defenses. Jake's evidence needed to be overwhelming and irrefutable, presented in a way that would make cover-up impossible and retaliation ineffective. Tyler's escalating harassment during Jake's junior year had made the investigation personal in a way it hadn't been before. What started as a quest for justice for his father had evolved into something more immediate and visceral. Tyler represented everything that was corrupt about the Richardson family's influence in Riverside, and every cruel act of bullying reminded Jake that his father's killers were not only walking free, but actively profiting from their crimes. Crazy glue incident in the computer lab had been a turning point, the moment when Tyler's casual cruelty crossed a line that Jake could no longer ignore. For 3 years, he had focused on building his case against Richardson Construction while enduring Tyler's harassment in silence, but silence was no longer sufficient. The time for passive investigation was ending, and the time for active resistance was about to begin. Morning routines in the Mitchell household had become exercises in careful choreography, designed to maximize efficiency while minimizing the evidence of how much their lives had contracted since David's death. Jake's alarm went off at 5:30, giving him enough time to shower and prepare breakfast before his mother returned from her overnight shift at the hospital. By 6:15, he would have coffee brewing and something simple ready to eat, creating the illusion of normalcy that both of them desperately needed to maintain. Lisa Mitchell would arrive home exhausted but trying to hide it, her scrubs wrinkled from 12 hours of caring for patients whose problems ranged from minor emergencies to life-threatening trauma. She had developed the nurse's ability to compartmentalize suffering, leaving her work emotions at the hospital so she could focus on being a mother during the few hours they had together each day. Jake had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether her shift had been routine or heartbreaking, adjusting his conversation accordingly. Their breakfast conversations followed predictable patterns that both found comforting in their reliability. Lisa would ask about school, homework, and whether Jake needed anything for his classes or his computer repair work. Jake would provide carefully edited highlights of his day, emphasizing positive interactions with teachers like Mr. Park, while omitting any mention of Tyler. Richardson or the investigation that consumed most of his free time. They both understood the boundaries of these exchanges, the topics that were safe and the ones that remained carefully unexplored. After his mother went to bed, Jake would prepare for school with the methodical precision of someone who understood that every detail mattered. His backpack contained not just textbooks and assignments, but also carefully selected tools that served dual purposes. The portable hard drive labeled backup files actually contained sophisticated hacking software and encrypted copies of everything he had discovered about Richardson construction. The innocuous-looking USB cable could function as a hardware keylogger if he needed to capture passwords from unattended computers. The bicycle ride to school took Jake through the heart of Riverside, past the construction sites and businesses that formed the economic foundation of their community. Every morning, he would pass Richardson construction vehicles heading to job sites throughout the county, their bright yellow trucks carrying workers who had no idea they were employed by a company that valued profit margins more than human lives. Jake had learned to recognize many of the drivers, men who had worked alongside his father and who still nodded respectfully when they saw David Mitchell's son. Riverside High School operated on the familiar rhythms of small-town education, where everyone knew everyone and social hierarchies remained remarkably stable from year to year. Jake's status as the quiet, smart kid had been established early and rarely challenged, providing him with a useful form of camouflage that allowed him to observe without drawing unwanted attention. Most of his classmates viewed him as harmless and slightly boring, exactly the impression he had cultivated to protect his real activities. First period was advanced calculus, where Jake's natural mathematical ability allowed him to excel without significant effort. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had given up trying to challenge him after discovering that he could solve problems using methods she didn't recognize, techniques he had learned from online courses that went far beyond what Riverside High's curriculum could provide. She had settled for giving him independent study projects that kept him occupied while she focused on students who actually needed instruction. The hallway transitions between classes provided Jake with opportunities to gather intelligence about Tyler Richardson's activities and mood. 3 years of careful observation had taught him to recognize the quarterback's patterns. The way Tyler's behavior toward others served as an early warning system for when he might escalate his harassment. Tyler was at his most dangerous when he felt his authority being questioned or when external pressures from his father created stress that he needed to release through cruelty toward more vulnerable targets. English literature with Miss Rodriguez was Jake's most challenging class, not because of the academic content, but because of the social dynamics it forced him to navigate. Group discussions and collaborative projects required him to interact with classmates who might otherwise remain distant, creating opportunities for both connection and conflict. Tyler Richardson was also in this class, seated 2 rows behind Jake, close enough to whisper threats or crude comments that only Jake could hear. The assignments in English often focused on themes of justice, power, and moral responsibility, topics that resonated deeply with Jake's personal situation. When they studied works like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Crucible, Jake found himself thinking about the parallels between fictional corruption and the very real injustices he witnessed daily in Riverside. He wrote essays about the importance of speaking truth to power while living the contradiction of remaining silent about the most important truth in his own life. Lunch period was Jake's most vulnerable time of day, 30 minutes when the normal structure of classes gave way to a more fluid social environment where Tyler Richardson's influence was most apparent. Jake had developed strategies for minimizing his exposure, usually eating quickly in the library where Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, appreciated his quiet presence and allowed him to use the computers for what she assumed were legitimate research projects. The library's computers were older and less powerful than what Jake had access to at home, but they served important purposes in his investigation. He could monitor Richardson Construction's public communications, track their stock price and financial filings, and maintain awareness of any news coverage that might affect their operations. More importantly, the library's internet connection was separate from the school's main network, providing him with a degree of anonymity when he needed to access sensitive information. Chemistry class with Dr. Foster provided Jake with his most genuine academic challenge, requiring him to master concepts that didn't come as naturally as mathematics or computer science. The lab work demanded precision and patience, qualities that served him well in his hacking activities, but which needed to be applied to physical rather than digital systems. Dr. Foster had noticed Jake's unusual combination of theoretical knowledge and practical caution, often asking him to assist other students with complex procedures. The afternoon computer science class with Mr. Park was simultaneously Jake's favorite and most stressful period of the day. He genuinely enjoyed the programming challenges and the opportunity to work on projects that utilized his advanced skills. But he also had to be careful not to reveal the full extent of his capabilities. Mr. Park was perceptive enough to recognize talent, but also ethical enough to ask uncomfortable questions if he suspected his students were engaged in questionable activities. Jake had learned to navigate this relationship by demonstrating impressive but not alarming competence, showing enough skill to earn Mr. Park's respect while maintaining plausible deniability about his more advanced capabilities. When working on network security assignments, Jake would solve problems using textbook methods rather than the more elegant techniques he had developed through experience. It was a delicate balance between honesty and self-preservation. The final period of the day was supposed to be study hall, but Jake had arranged to use the time for an independent research project that allowed him to work in the computer lab without supervision. This arrangement provided him with legitimate access to school resources while giving him cover for activities that went far beyond what any high school research project would require. He could monitor his various surveillance programs, update his files on Richardson Construction, and maintain the digital infrastructure that supported his investigation. After school, Jake's routine varied depending on whether he had computer repair appointments or other obligations. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons were reserved for his work at Tech Fix Repair Shop, a small business owned by Frank Morrison, no relation to the principal. Frank had been impressed by Jake's diagnostic abilities and had started referring customers who needed more sophisticated help than basic hardware replacement or virus removal. The repair shop work provided Jake with more than just income. It also gave him access to equipment and information that proved useful in his investigation. Customers often brought in computers that contained interesting data, either because they didn't understand how to delete files properly or because they assumed their information would remain private. Jake maintained strict ethical boundaries about customer privacy, but he couldn't help noticing when someone brought in a computer that had obvious connections to Richardson Construction. Wednesday afternoons were reserved for volunteer work at the Riverside Community Center, teaching basic computer skills to elementary school students and senior citizens. This commitment served multiple purposes in Jake's carefully constructed life. It provided him with legitimate community service hours that looked good on college applications. It gave him access to the building where his father had died, and it allowed him to maintain relationships with people who remembered David Mitchell positively. The community center's computer lab was equipped with donated machines that Jake had helped refurbish, turning obsolete equipment into functional tools for digital literacy education. Many of his students were elderly residents who wanted to stay connected with distant family members, and their gratitude for his patient instruction provided Jake with one of the few purely positive experiences in his week. These interactions reminded him that technology could be used to help people rather than just to uncover corruption and seek justice. Evening hours were when Jake's real work began, after his mother left for her overnight shift and he had the apartment to himself. He would secure the doors and windows, activate the privacy screens on his equipment, and settle into the focused concentration that complex hacking required. The investigation into Richardson Construction had evolved into something approaching a full-time occupation, demanding skills that ranged from technical penetration testing to financial analysis to legal research. His digital workspace had expanded to fill most of their small living room, with multiple monitors displaying different aspects of his investigation simultaneously. One screen might show Richardson Construction's internal email system, another their financial records, and a third the various news sources and regulatory agencies that Jake monitored for relevant developments. The complexity of managing all this information had forced him to develop organizational systems that rivaled what professional intelligence analysts used. The most challenging aspect of Jake's daily routine was managing the emotional weight of what he had discovered about his father's death and Richardson Construction's ongoing crimes. Every new piece of evidence reinforced his understanding of how thoroughly the system had failed his family, how completely the pursuit of profit had overwhelmed any consideration of human dignity or safety. The anger that this knowledge generated had to be carefully contained and channeled, transformed into fuel for his investigation rather than allowed to consume him. Sleep came irregularly and was often interrupted by dreams that mixed memories of his father with visions of the confrontation that Jake knew was approaching. He would dream of David Mitchell warning him about the dangers of seeking revenge, or of Tyler Richardson laughing as safety equipment failed and workers fell. These dreams served as reminders that his investigation was about more than just personal justice. It was about preventing future victims and exposing a pattern of corruption that threatened everyone in Riverside. The weight of keeping so many secrets was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Jake loved his mother deeply and hated deceiving her about how he spent his time and what he had discovered about David's death. He respected Mr. Park and felt guilty about using the teacher's trust to access school resources for his investigation. Most of all, he struggled with the knowledge that he possessed information that could prevent future accidents and deaths, but that releasing it prematurely might result in its suppression rather than its exposure. Each day brought new evidence of Richardson Construction's corruption and new examples of Tyler's cruelty, creating a mounting pressure that demanded some form of release. Jake's technical skills had grown to the point where he could seriously damage the company's operations or expose their crimes to national media attention. The only question was whether he had the courage to act on what he knew, and whether he could live with the consequences of remaining silent while others suffered. Emma Chun had been invisible for most of her junior year at Riverside High, which was exactly how she preferred it. At 16, she had already learned that being noticed by the wrong people could make life unbearable in a small town where social hierarchies were enforced with the ruthlessness of medieval kingdoms. Her strategy for survival involved excellence in academics, participation in low-profile extracurricular activities, and a carefully cultivated reputation for being helpful but unremarkable. This approach had served her well until the day she witnessed Tyler Richardson corner a freshman in the bathroom and realized that silence was no longer an option. The incident that changed everything had occurred 3 weeks before the crazy glue confrontation in the computer lab. Emma had been leaving her AP physics class when she heard sounds of distress coming from the women's restroom near the science wing. Her first instinct was to find a teacher or administrator, but something about the muffled sobs and harsh whispers made her hesitate. Instead, she carefully opened the door just enough to see Tyler Richardson towering over Sophie Martinez, a 14-year-old girl whose only crime was being in the wrong place when Tyler needed someone to humiliate. Emma watched in horror as Tyler systematically destroyed Sophie's confidence with calculated cruelty, making comments about her appearance, her family's financial situation, and her academic struggles. What made the scene even more disturbing was the presence of Madison Wells and 2 other girls who formed Tyler's usual audience. their laughter encouraging his performance while ensuring that Sophie understood how completely isolated she was. The bathroom setting eliminated any possibility of adult intervention, creating a perfect environment for psychological torture. Sophie Martinez reminded Emma of her younger sister, brave and vulnerable in equal measure, trying to navigate high school with limited resources and no understanding of the unwritten rules that govern social survival. Emma had managed to protect herself through careful observation and strategic invisibility, but Sophie lacked those skills and was paying the price for her innocence. As Tyler's verbal assault continued, Emma felt something shift inside her. A recognition that watching injustice without responding was its own form of complicity. The phone in Emma's backpack had been recording audio from the moment she approached the bathroom door, a habit she had developed after reading about citizen journalism and the importance of documenting abuse when official channels failed. What started as a general precaution had become something more specific when she began noticing Tyler's pattern of targeting vulnerable students in locations where teachers rarely ventured. The recording of Sophie's humiliation was clear and undeniable, capturing not just Tyler's words, but also the encouragement from his audience. That evening, Emma had sat in her bedroom staring at the audio file, understanding that she possessed evidence of behavior that should result in Tyler's suspension or expulsion. She also understood the political realities that made meaningful action unlikely. Tyler Richardson was untouchable in Riverside, protected by his father's economic influence and the community's unwillingness to challenge the family that provided so many jobs. Previous complaints about Tyler's behavior had been dismissed or minimized, leaving his victims with no recourse except endurance. The decision to expand her documentation efforts had not been made lightly. Emma understood that systematically recording Tyler's harassment activities would put her in significant danger if she was discovered. Richardson family revenge was swift and thorough, capable of destroying not just students, but entire families who depended on Richardson construction for their livelihoods. Emma's father worked as an accountant for several local businesses, including some that contracted with Richardson construction, making her family vulnerable to economic retaliation. Despite the risks, Emma began carrying her phone with recording capabilities activated whenever she was in areas where Tyler typically operated. The bathroom incidents were just one aspect of his harassment campaign. He also targeted students in the parking lot, the less monitored hallways, and the areas around the athletic facilities where his status as quarterback provided additional protection. Over the course of 2 weeks, Emma documented 17 separate incidents involving 12 different victims. The patterns that emerged from Emma's surveillance were both systematic and personal. Tyler chose his targets based on their vulnerability rather than any specific provocation, focusing on students who lacked social connections or family resources that might provide protection. His harassment techniques were sophisticated enough to avoid obvious criminal behavior while inflicting maximum psychological damage. Most importantly, he operated with the confidence of someone who had never faced meaningful consequences for his actions. Jake Mitchell had appeared in Emma's recordings, almost by accident. She had been documenting Tyler's harassment of 2 sophomore boys near the gym when Jake walked past, and Tyler had immediately shifted his attention to the quiet senior. What followed was different from Tyler's usual performances, more personal and intense, suggesting a history of conflict that went beyond random bullying. Emma recognized something in Jake's controlled responses that indicated hidden strength, a quality that made Tyler's attacks more vicious and persistent. The computer lab incident had been the culmination of weeks of escalating tension that Emma had been tracking through her surveillance. Tyler's social media posts, overheard conversations, and behavioral patterns had all pointed towards something significant happening, though Emma hadn't anticipated the specific nature of the planned attack. The crazy glue represented a dangerous escalation from psychological harassment to potential physical harm, crossing legal boundaries that even Richardson family influence might not be able to obscure. Emma's decision to warn Jake through the encrypted message system had been spontaneous, driven by the immediate recognition that Tyler's planned attack could result in permanent injury. She had spent months perfecting her digital security protocols, learning to communicate anonymously through systems that couldn't be traced back to her real identity. The technical skills required for this level of operational security had been acquired through online tutorials and practice, transforming her from a typical high school student into something approaching a covert operative. The aftermath of the computer lab confrontation had provided Emma with opportunities to expand her investigation beyond Tyler's individual actions toward the broader systems that enabled his behavior. Jake's response to Tyler's attack had been revealing in multiple ways, demonstrating not just physical capability, but also emotional restraint that suggested deeper motivations. Emma recognized a fellow investigator, someone who understood that meaningful change required more than just momentary victories. Approaching Jake directly had required careful planning and significant courage. Emma understood that revealing her surveillance activities would make her vulnerable to retaliation, while also potentially compromising the investigation she had been conducting. However, the evidence she had gathered was useless without someone willing to act on it, and Jake's demonstration of both capability and restraint suggested that he might be the ally she needed to transform documentation into action. The meeting had been arranged through the same encrypted messaging system Emma had used to warn Jake about Tyler's planned attack. She had suggested the public library's computer lab after hours, when the building was technically closed but accessible through the staff entrance that Emma had learned to manipulate through careful observation of the custodial staff's routines. The location provided security through obscurity while offering access to computers that couldn't be traced to either of their personal accounts. Jake's reaction to Emma's evidence had been exactly what she had hoped for: focused analysis rather than emotional outrage, recognition of patterns rather than fixation on individual incidents, and immediate understanding of the broader implications. He had studied her recordings with the systematic attention of someone who understood the importance of documentation, while asking questions that revealed his own investigative experience. Most importantly, he had treated her as a partner rather than a subordinate, recognizing that her evidence was crucial to any meaningful response. The scope of Jake's own investigation had surprised Emma despite her expectations. She had suspected that his controlled responses to Tyler's harassment indicated deeper preparation, but the sophistication of his digital forensics capabilities and the breadth of his evidence against Richardson Construction exceeded anything she had imagined. The connection between Tyler's bullying and his father's corporate crimes provided a context that transformed individual harassment into part of a broader pattern of family criminality. Emma's technical skills complemented Jake's capabilities in ways that neither of them could have achieved alone. Her talent for social engineering and human intelligence gathering balanced his expertise in network penetration and digital forensics. Together, they could document not just what Richardson Construction was doing, but also how they were getting away with it, mapping the networks of corruption and influence that protected the family from accountability. The investigation that emerged from their partnership was more ambitious and comprehensive than either had originally envisioned. Emma's evidence of Tyler's systematic harassment provided the foundation for documenting a pattern of behavior that extended back years and affected dozens of students. Jake's materials on Richardson Construction's corporate crimes revealed the source of the family's sense of impunity and the economic mechanisms that protected them from meaningful oversight. Their collaboration required the development of new security protocols that could protect both of their identities while allowing them to share information and coordinate activities. Emma's experience with anonymous communication systems combined with Jake's knowledge of digital forensics to create a secure workspace that existed entirely in encrypted virtual environments. They could collaborate on research and planning without leaving traces that could be discovered by school administrators or Richardson family investigators. The emotional impact of finding a true ally had been unexpected for both Emma and Jake. Months of conducting solitary investigations while maintaining facades of normalcy had created isolation that neither had fully recognized until it was relieved. Having someone who understood the stakes and shared the commitment to justice transformed their work from obsessive personal missions into a shared campaign with realistic prospects for success. Emma's perspective on Tyler Richardson's behavior had evolved through her collaboration with Jake, from seeing individual acts of cruelty to understanding systematic intimidation designed to maintain family dominance. Tyler's harassment wasn't random teenage bullying, but calculated enforcement of social hierarchies that protected Richardson Construction's interests. Students who might otherwise question authority or investigate suspicious activities were neutralized through fear and humiliation before they could become threats. The evidence they had gathered together painted a comprehensive picture of corruption that extended from high school bathrooms to corporate boardrooms, connected by the same fundamental disregard for human dignity that characterized all Richardson family operations. Tyler's treatment of vulnerable students reflected the same mindset that led his father to cut safety corners and cover up workplace deaths. The bullying was not separate from the corporate crimes, but rather their logical extension into the social sphere. Planning their response required balancing multiple competing priorities and risks. They needed to expose both Tyler's harassment and Richardson Construction's crimes while protecting themselves from retaliation and ensuring that their evidence would be taken seriously by authorities who had previously ignored or suppressed similar information. The timing and method of their revelations would determine whether they achieved justice or simply became additional victims of Richardson family power. Emma's role in the upcoming confrontation would be crucial but largely invisible, providing documentation and technical support, while Jake faced the more direct physical and social risks. Her surveillance capabilities would ensure that Tyler's response to being exposed was thoroughly recorded, creating evidence that even Richardson family influence couldn't dismiss or explain away. More importantly, her network of hidden cameras and audio devices would capture the reactions of bystanders and authority figures, documenting the broader community's response to the revelation of Richardson family criminality. The preparation phase of their operation required attention to details that went far beyond what most high school students would consider. Emma had to position recording devices in multiple locations, while ensuring they couldn't be discovered or disabled. Jake had to prepare digital packages that would automatically distribute their evidence to multiple recipients if something happened to prevent manual release. Both of them had to develop contingency plans for various scenarios, including Richardson family attempts at intimidation, legal action, or violence. Emma's family situation provided both advantages and complications for their investigation. Her parents' focus on academic achievement and college preparation meant they paid little attention to her after-school activities as long as her grades remained excellent. However, her father's professional connections to Richardson-affiliated businesses created vulnerabilities that could be exploited if their activities were discovered. Emma had to balance operational security with maintaining her family's economic stability. The technical infrastructure supporting their investigation had grown, increasingly sophisticated as Emma and Jake learned to anticipate and counter potential Richardson family responses. They had developed secure communication systems, backup, evidence storage, and automatic distribution mechanisms that would ensure their information reached the public, even if they were prevented from releasing it personally. The complexity of these systems reflected their growing understanding of exactly how powerful and ruthless their opponents were. Emma's documentation of Tyler's behavior had revealed disturbing escalation patterns that suggested the crazy glue incident was likely to be followed by even more dangerous attacks if left unchecked. Tyler's growing frustration with Jake's resistance and his increasing desperation to reassert dominance were creating conditions for violence that could result in serious injury or death. Their investigation was no longer just about justice for past crimes, but also about preventing future tragedies. The psychological pressure of maintaining their investigation, while continuing to attend classes and interact normally with their peers, had tested both Emma and Jake's emotional resilience. They had to watch Tyler continue his harassment activities while pretending ignorance, observe Richardson construction vehicles around town while suppressing their anger about David Mitchell's death, and plan their revelations while maintaining facades of typical teenage concerns about grades and college applications. Emma's perspective on their upcoming confrontation with Tyler was shaped by her understanding that this moment would determine not just their personal futures, but also the broader question of whether justice was possible in Riverside. If they succeeded in exposing Richardson family crimes and holding Tyler accountable for his harassment, they would demonstrate that small-town corruption could be challenged by determined individuals with sufficient skill and courage. If they failed, they would likely become cautionary examples that deterred future challenges to Richardson family power. The evidence packages they had prepared contained more than just documentation of crimes. They represented a comprehensive indictment of systems that prioritized wealth and influence over human dignity and safety. Emma understood that their success would depend not just on the quality of their evidence, but also on their ability to present it in ways that made denial or suppression impossible. The Richardson family's survival had always depended on controlling information and limiting public awareness of their activities. Emma's final preparations involved ensuring that their evidence would reach audiences beyond Riverside's local power structures, including state and federal agencies that might be less susceptible to Richardson family influence. Her research had identified journalists, prosecutors, and regulatory officials who had previously investigated similar cases of corporate corruption and might be willing to pursue Richardson construction, despite the political obstacles involved. The countdown to their confrontation with Tyler had created an atmosphere of barely contained tension that Emma could feel building throughout the school. Tyler's own behavior was becoming increasingly erratic as he sensed challenges to his authority. Without being able to identify their source, Emma's surveillance indicated that he was planning something significant that would reassert his dominance and send a message to anyone considering resistance. Jake's transformation over the course of their partnership had been remarkable to observe. The quiet, careful student who had absorbed Tyler's harassment in silence had evolved into someone capable of strategic thinking and decisive action. Emma recognized that their collaboration had provided Jake with not just tactical support, but also the confidence that came from knowing he was not facing Richardson family power alone. The moment of revelation was approaching, and Emma understood that everything they had worked toward would soon be tested against the reality of Richardson family resistance and small-town politics. Their evidence was comprehensive and damning, but evidence alone had never been sufficient to challenge entrenched power. Success would require not just documentation, but also courage, timing, and perhaps a measure of luck that neither planning nor preparation could guarantee. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.